Hello and welcome to Season 2, Episode 9 of the Talking Central Banks podcast with me, Karan Marishi. This platform is exclusively dedicated to everything central banking, monetary economics, and policy technicals for observers across the world. Today, we will be talking about Monetary Authority of Singapore's AI Risk Management Guidelines, or AIRG. MAS's idea is to strengthen AI supervision in financial institutions by requiring boards to hold direct accountability for AI risk management, including governance of AI agents and generative AI. Our guest today is Gary Yang, who led AI risk supervision at the Monetary Authority of Singapore, where he developed Singapore's first AI risk management guidelines for the financial sector. He was previously division head for investment risk management, overseeing risk management of Singapore's foreign reserves, and also has deep expertise in Basel capital rules, banking and capital market policies, and model risk supervision. Gary holds a PhD in computer science from the Singapore Management University. His research focused on deep learning for networks, time series, and multimodal data, and he has published at leading venues including ACL and ACM conferences. He also holds master's degrees in financial engineering and knowledge engineering from NUS, as well as an electrical engineering degree from the University of Toronto. Welcome to the show, Gary.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. So, Gary, you spent 18 years at Monetary Authority of Singapore, including leading AI supervision. Given this background, I wanted your perspectives on what made a central bank of MAS's stature decide that it needed someone focused specifically on AI risk supervision.
So for MAS, the world of AI governance was not a new one. We started all the way back in 2018. So we had the fairly well-known FEED principles: fairness, ethics, accountability, and transparency. So they stayed as principles for quite some years. We worked with the industry and so on and so forth. During that period, I was basically doing risk management. I was not doing any AI, any tech stuff at all. But midway through, I got a bit tired and I wanted a break. So I took a period of absence from MAS, and somehow that led me to a PhD in AI or computer science. So think about it, right? I had risk management background. MAS kindly supported me for my PhD in computer science, and I specialized in AI. And then I came back to a time when ChatGPT had just exploded, 2022, 2023. So my boss told me, you want to do this? Actually, I don't think she gave me any choice. So basically, that's how I landed up doing AI risk supervision, and basically why MAS had this sort of role for the last 2 years, and they are building on it after this.
You have called the 2008 financial crisis as a useful parallel for AI risk today,
Yeah.
Gary. What's the common thread, in your opinion, between these two events?
So I've said this a lot of times for two reasons, right? So one is I joined MAS in 2007, right before the financial crisis. I was doing Basel capital rules, and it was a very interesting period, right? You saw that one model caused almost the entire great financial crisis, which is the Gaussian copula model, right? And so because of that, if you think about it, what happened in 2008, 2009 was that lack of transparency, that lack of understanding of a model, a single, actually quite a simple model, led to a great financial crisis. And now you fast forward, right, to 2022, 2023, 2024, 2025. Banks, capital market institutions, and so on and so forth in the financial sector are implementing a lot more than one simple single model like a Gaussian copula model, right? So if you think about it, if we thought that single model in 2008 was too complex to understand, we now have the issue where AI models, right, are pervasive across the financial sector, and increasingly they will be pervasive across all use cases, I'm quite sure. Right. So in a way, we should think about what happened in 2008, and we can learn the lessons from them when we govern and risk manage models today.
Very interesting, Gary. So before involving yourself in AI supervision at MAS,
Yeah.
You spent several years building an expertise in Basel frameworks, as you just mentioned, and
Yeah.
model risk audits. That
Yeah.
is, credit scoring, market risk, and margin models.
Yeah.
Keen to know your thoughts on how did this experience shape your thinking about AI risk in general
Correct.
at the central bank level?
Yeah. So for Basel, it's quite straightforward. I mean, Basel has the rules, standardized
Yeah.
approaches. They also have
Mm,
models, IRB, IMA. These days, there's no IMA, but I mean IRB, right?
mm,
So if you think about it, those were models. And from my years doing model risk audits, right? We look at credit models, market pricing models, liquidity models, and so on and so forth. After looking
mm.
at them for a while, you realize that actually what you need to look out for um, just boils down to three questions, basically, right? The first is models are everywhere, right? And one problem is sometimes people use them without knowing whether they are suitable for the job. So you have to know what's at risk first, right? You need to
Right.
identify where your models are. You need to understand what is the risk of each model, what's their risk materiality. Not all models are built equal. Some are highly important, some are not. And after that, you have to make sure that you record them properly so you know where they are. So what's at risk is very important, whether it's for traditional models or AI models. Second, you need to know how to manage them. So even in the old days, when we were dealing with traditional models, we focus a lot on evaluation and testing. Fast forward to today, to AI models, there's no difference. We still have to focus on that. We would have focused on fairness as well if, let's say, for example, they were for credit risk models because those are essential services. Fast forward to today, even if you have AI models, the same applies. So basically, the controls that you need to think about are there are a lot of parallels between traditional models and AI models. And the third, and I usually put this at the last because for a very simple reason, if you cannot have a good system, even in the past, traditional models or today for AI models, if you cannot have good controls, you will find it really hard to govern it. So the board, the senior management, if they can't put the systems in place, they can't put the controls in place, whatever you say about governance and oversight will never be effective. Yeah, so that's the kind of the parallels. Things have changed, but there are many things in the past that we can learn from and still apply today.
Right. Singapore went from voluntary principles to binding guidelines over 7 years, Gary,
Yeah,
when it comes to AI supervision. Can you walk us through that journey, including focus on ethics, accountability,
yeah,
and transparency,
yeah,
which is called as Fiat, Veritas, the thematic review, and
yeah,
eventually the AIRG?
yeah.
So the question, Gary, therefore, is that why and how does the sequencing matter in this case?
Yeah. So I can't speak for the folks or my predecessors who did the earlier work. They did good stuff, but I think I can characterize the journey as such. So when you first start with an area that is very complex, maybe like AI, or something where things are not very settled yet, not like Basel Capital Rules, but Basel Capital Rules also took a long time, 20 over years, right? But
Right.
when you first start, it's good to do it at a high level. So you can set the
Right.
boundaries. It's very hard to be very prescriptive initially. So the FEED principles, fairness, ethics, accountability, and transparency principles, then, as my friend reminds me, someone who was doing it, we focus on the outcomes. We did not focus on what to tell the banks to do, but because at that point in time, it was maybe not clear. Even if you prescribe something, it might not be the right solution for the job, but telling them what the outcome is based on certain principles makes sense. And then what happened was for Veritas, they decided to work with the industry. So MAS has this common approach, which is we will work with the industry very closely because
Mm.
it is a very productive relationship, right? They know what we are thinking, we know what they are doing. They are practitioners, we are not practitioners. We can learn from them. They also will be able to understand our thinking behind certain things. So Veritas was basically that. MAS working with industry to develop guidance in a form of practices. MAS working with industry to develop toolkits that industry could use in a real context. And that was Veritas. So that was all fine and dandy. It was pretty much AI and machine learning at that point in time. Then we kind of hit that inflection point, right? ChatGPT came. Everything changed after that. So what MAS did was it set up Project Mindforge. Project Mindforge in its first year was just about mapping out the risks. So that's that. And then what happened was in 2024, I returned to MAS and we did a review of most of the major banks on their AI model risk management practices. So in a way, that was a fact-finding mission to understand. So it was not to find fault, etc. It was really to understand what were the best practices, what was lacking, and then use the information paper that we published at the end of 2024 to inform the industry. So nothing that binds them yet, but it informs them what is good, what is bad, what you should think about, what are some of the key components, and so on and so forth. And finally, and most recently, so after that whole journey, we learned a lot from feed all the way to the information paper and the review of AI model risk management. And now we are probably a little bit more comfortable with developing a set of guidelines, and we call them AI risk management guidelines. So they are not law, they are not regulations. It's just that at a guideline level, there are certain expectations that MAS will look at when they visit the banks, inspect the banks, and so on and so forth. And that's the journey, basically. So from voluntary principles to a lot of collaboration to fact-finding and evidence and understanding what the industry is actually doing to developing a guidelines. So the 7-year journey in a nutshell.
Right. Very interesting. So, Gary, you led Mass's thematic review of AI in banks in 24, and you just mentioned that in your previous response. Can you explain in detail how does a central bank actually go about assessing whether banks are managing AI risks properly?
Yeah. So since I left MAS, I met this lady. So she's an anthropologist, and she has a very interesting research topic, which is that she writes about how money interacts with technology. So in a way,
Right.
what she writes about is money is an interface, is a social interface, and she goes around understanding how people look at it, interface with it, how they think about, for example, digital assets and so on and so forth, right? Actually, it's exactly the same, right? When a supervisor goes down to a bank, there are two possibilities, right? One is something has gone wrong. We need to do an audit, right? When we do a thematic review, it is similar to that, but we are not really on a mission to find fault. We are more on a journey to understand, as at least for the AI review, for the model risk management review in 2024, we really just wanted to go down, understand how banks at a point in time were managing AI risk from front to end. So we look at first line, the developers, the business, and then we look at the second line, the risk managers, the tech risk people, the model risk people. We didn't move to the third line, which is the auditors, but generally we had a very good sense from visiting and reviewing the banks, how they actually look at it. What are the practical limitations? What are good practices? What works? What doesn't? And the beauty of it is, as a supervisor, we see it from the top, right? We have a bird's eye view.
Right.
We may not be excellent practitioners, we may not be technologists, we may just be policy people, but by looking at it across a range of banks, we can actually distill and synthesize a lot of things, and that helps us a lot. And hopefully, it helps the industry as well.
That review, by the way, Gary, became the monetary authority of Singapore's AI risk
Yeah.
management guidelines, or AIRG. How did what you found on the ground directly shape these guidelines? Please share your
Yeah.
experiences.
Yeah, so there are many things that we learned. They are all in the information paper, but maybe just let me give some insights, right? So one of the big things in AI risk management or AI governance is people always say we need explainability, we need transparency, and I don't disagree. But by visiting and understanding the banks, what they do in use cases and all that, we get a much more nuanced understanding of what is needed. Explainability is not something that you need for all use cases. Some use cases you
Right.
need explainability, some you don't. Right? Essential service, credit service, you may need some explainability. Fraud detection, you may need some explainability. But for simple document processing, there is no real need for explainability. So that's one, but in a way, you have to think about how they interact as well, right? Explainability is not just explainability. You need to think about how explainability interacts with evaluation and testing, how explainability interacts with human oversight. How do you design explainability for human oversight? So, I mean, we did not take away all that from just visiting the banks, but just by understanding how they do it, understanding what is needed, you get a lot of insights and understanding on how we can construct a framework that can be used across different financial institutions.
Talking a bit on the mechanism of examination, Gary. Now, from the look of it, the AIRG has to be retrofitted with the working of
Mm.
both a small fintech and a
Yeah,
large bank. How do you design one set of guidelines for that kind of broad range that includes different kinds of financial institutions
yeah.
and fintechs?
So I would say that first you need to think about the framework. So you need to think about the first principles, expectations that are needed. That's the first, right? So when we thought about them, and if you think about them from that perspective, you can see what are the key elements that a big firm, a big bank to a 5% fintech needs. You distill that. Second, you need to be very clear about what it means for a big bank versus a small fintech by making sure that you highlight that relevance and proportionality is very important. So that's the second. The third is that in the AI risk management guidelines, we were very, very clear that there is a need for proportionality, and we use an annex to explain that think about your AI in your firm, right? You need to think about whether the use case that you use AI for is integrated or not. What do we mean by integrated? Integrated just means that when you have AI integrated into your workflow, into your business, to the extent that if, let's say, for example, OpenAI or Anthropic goes down tomorrow, you will be in trouble, you can't function. That means you actually rely on it a lot. And in that case, you need to apply a higher level of control. But if, for example, even if it goes down, it's fine. You have humans, you have processes, you have backup plans that can address the issue. Then perhaps you can be subject to a lower bar, right? And lower bar could mean that you just need to identify who's responsible. You need to put in place some basic policies on what can be done, what cannot be done. You need to review them. You need to communicate them. You don't need to go to the full AI RG lah, basically.
Right. So, distill it for us, Gary.
Yeah.
What are the first three things a supervisor checks when assessing a bank's AI risk management?
So earlier on, I said there's oversight, which is about who's accountable. There's also how to manage it, which is about controls. So I would say that what I would zoom into immediately is what's at risk, right? How well do you do identification? How well do you do risk materiality assessment? And how well do you record it in an inventory? Because I think without these three systems interlocking and existing, everything else, oversight, controls, they will not work well.
Okay. That brings me to the role of transparency and explainability, Gary.
Yep.
How do you tell when a firm is doing it for real versus doing it for the show? This is very similar to the greenwashing that is
Yeah.
synonymous with ESG ratings these days.
Yeah. So I'll share one thing. I think transparency is getting more and more useless these days. For a very simple reason, right? For the longest time, we have said if you use AI, you need to disclose it so that your end user is informed. But today, if you look at how AI is being used, right, it's everywhere. In
Mm.
hidden in many ways that we cannot see. Even if you disclose, what do you expect the end user to do? There's nothing much the person can do. It's just, in a way, it's like greenwashing. Oh, I declare, and then responsibility absolved is someone else's
Right.
problem. That won't
Mm.
work, right? So, like I mentioned earlier, we can think about AI risk management, AI governance as an interlocking set of controls, safeguards, and so on and so forth. So explainability is intricately related to transparency, but quite different. What is explainability for? Explainability just means that you want to build a system that you understand. And because you are trying to understand the system, it doesn't mean that you need a method that you can exactly explain how the neural network is behaving. We have many methods in computer science or AI for it. You can pinpoint the exact neurons that are firing, but that doesn't really help the end user. It doesn't really help the developer. So understanding explainability from the perspective of how you understand the system, how it works, when something breaks, do you know why? Brings us to other things, like, for example, evaluation and testing, right? If you test the range of things that AI model can work on, and you see how they behave under different circumstances, that helps you. If you design the human oversight system, right, not just put a human in the loop, because that is again theater, right? You need to design it for the human to process it and so on and so forth. And it gets harder and harder today because agentic AI is a lot faster than maybe in the days of machine learning. Yeah. So that's some of the thoughts I have about theater versus practical applications of risk management.
Right. Taking our attention to the macro picture, Gary,
Yeah.
banks operate across borders, including those from Singapore. In your opinion, is regulatory fragmentation, that is, contradictory AI requirements from different central banks across the world, a real risk for global financial system?
So I think that there is two perspectives that we need to think about, right? So for AI governance and risk management, the first is what are the areas that are governed and risk managed? What are the areas that you look at when you go in to look at financial institutions, AI governance or risk management, right? And I think in those areas, there is a lot more convergence than divergence. Almost every regulatory framework looks at oversight, that's for sure. They will also look at some of the things that I mentioned earlier, the systems for identifying, for risk materiality assessments, for governance and inventory. That's
Right.
par for course, I would say. And increasingly so, even the controls are converging. Explainability, fairness, transparency, human oversight, evaluation and testing, cybersecurity, change management, monitoring, those I think are converging. If you just throw a stone, look at a regulation framework, you can find 80% of them in almost any of them. On the other
Right.
hand, the instruments of implementing it is pretty divergent, I would say. You have regulations like the EU AI Act to voluntary standards like the NIST AI Risk Management Framework in the US, and a lot of things in between. So instrument-wise, there is some divergence, but I think there's some hope then because the areas that you control and you use to risk manage are actually more important than the instrument.
Right. Gary, the traditional model validation assumes testable inputs and outputs.
Yeah.
But with breakthroughs such as NLPs, however, that assumption breaks in recent LLMs. How should a supervisor, such as a central bank, even approach validating a generative model?
Yeah. So let me take a step back. So in the old days of machine learning, in the old days of AI, deep learning, it was a lot easier to do validation or evaluation and testing for a very simple reason, because most of the time we were using structured data, right? So tables, numbers, time series, where there is a bound. There's a bound on what goes in, there's a bound on what comes out. And large language models break that for very simple reasons because the permutations when it comes to image, when it comes to text, is pretty much endless. So that's the basic problem. But I don't think that that means that we have no solution, right? We can still evaluate and test them, but just that we have to acknowledge that we cannot just do traditional evaluation and testing. We cannot just think about, oh, I will just put in these numbers and see what comes out, and then that's the range. We have to think about more things, right? So we do still have to collate a good test set. And this test set needs to be contextualized to the financial institution's use case. We need to think about other things. For example, how to attack the system. Think about what the attackers will be thinking about. That's called red teaming. we need to think about maybe we are not just going to be thinking about what to evaluate and test, but we need to put some guardrails. And when I say guardrails, I don't mean just large language models as judges, but rather think about guardrails that are a lot more deterministic, right? So there is this inclination to just throw everything at a large language model, right? Whether you want to do math or you want to check something that has a clear rule, you just throw into a large language model. I think that does not make sense. You should be thinking about what a large language model is good for and what you can use rules for, right? Calculators, rules, and so on and so forth. I like to characterize it as a burger, a hamburger, right? You have the fluff, the top bun, and the lower bun, which are very good, which is what large language models are essentially, right? They are very good
Right.
for understanding intent, they are very good for synthesizing data, and so on and so forth. But you can use what you were used to, your rules, your functions, your tools that are a lot more deterministic to use and let the large language models use them in between. So the meat, right? And in that way, you can probably get more reliance. The system will be more robust. You can rely on them a bit more because you can trust the rules that you allow the large language models to use a bit more than just treating the large language model as something that you throw everything in and hope to get an answer out of.
Right. Right. Very interesting, Gary. Agentic AI systems that act autonomously, Gary, is the next frontier.
Yeah.
And I think all of us would agree on that. How should one think that AI risk management for AI agents that might be intelligent enough to evade detection tests run by a regulator?
Yeah. So for AI agents, there are many problems that can occur, but you can think about them as being in two areas. The first is there is no longer just one generative AI model that may make a mistake, right? One gen LLM that is in an agentic AI system may make one mistake, and then the next one compounds because it will make another mistake on the mistake. The third one compounds again, another mistake on that. So the error compounds very easily. That's the first issue with agentic AI. The second issue is that because I mean, for ChatGPT, right, they give you an answer that's hallucinated. That's just an answer. But in the case of agentic AI, they can act, right? They can act on the environment, whether they run a code, they access a database, or they, I mean, communicate with someone, or they actually approve an action. So there is a lot more consequence from that. Um, on the other hand, there is some ways that actually make it a lot more tractable than a Gen AI, right? For Gen AI, even when you say you are using a reasoning or thinking model, the problem with that is even reasoning or thinking traces can be hallucinated, right? So what you need to do is think about how you will make the agentic AI log and trace their actions and explain what they did. And you can do that with agentic AI better than Gen AI, right? You can build a large language model that can access tools, but you make them log their actions, right? Step by step. And you can see what happens, you can trace what happens, you can explain what happens, you can understand what happens. So I wouldn't say that that's the solution to agentic AI, but there are these perspectives going around, and there are more and more. So for example, yesterday, the day before, me and some other folks, we released a paper on how to do agentic model risk management. And we think about agentic AI as a composite or rather a collection of capabilities. And every
Right.
capability is a granular unit that you can place guards around, deterministic rules around. You can make sure that you evaluate and test them in a very structured and systematic way. And think about it like a Lego, right?
Right.
Capability for retrieval, capability for computation, capability for answering a question. And you string them together, you have an agentic AI system. But if you govern each of the capabilities properly, you have a much higher chance of getting a reliable system than if you just piece everything together at one shot right at the start.
Right. Looking to the future, Gary, the AI game moves pretty fast. How, in your opinion, does a regulator keep pace without stifling innovation or always being a step behind?
So there is this so some folks have always said that in this world of AI, sometimes the first mover is not the winner. right? The first mover is the person who's going to make the most mistakes, and the person who's right behind is the one who's going to reap all the benefits because he's being sheltered from the first person by the wind,
Right.
buffeted by the first person.
Hmm.
So in a way, a regulator is the same, right? We have a little bit more luxury. We are not building things, but we can look at them at a higher level. We have the ability to look across more institutions and see what are the best practices, what are the things that work, what are the things that fail. So for a regulator, it's difficult because we are not right in the action, but it's also a little bit easier because we can be slightly behind, looking at where the mistakes are being made. As long as they don't go too far away, you have a good chance of building a good framework that can capture this. Yeah.
Right. So if I may ask, Gary,
Mm.
based on your experience, the three sequential pillars comprising of Basel capital rules, then
Yeah.
investment risk management, and then finally AI supervision. What's the thread that connects them all, in your opinion?
So I think for me, this is a personal take. I think that the three things, Basel, model risk management, AI, what connects them is first principles, basically. So for all three areas, you cannot depend on just the rules, the surface of the rules, right? So when you look at AI governance and you look at it at a very surface level, oh, you should do this, oh, you should do that because it's good for you or whatever, or it's because you want to be fair. That's too high level to actually build good systems and frameworks. You need to look one level below. So same for Basel. You are not just looking at the formulas. The Basel rulebook is full of formulas. You're looking at what is the fundamental motivation behind them. For model risk, you're not just looking at the validation development documents, which are also full of formulas. You're looking at what are the fundamental limitations, what are fundamental advantages of different models, and so on and so forth. And same for AI. Many of the things that apply in the world of Basel and model risk management would also apply to AI today.
By the way, Gary, you are also a professional illustrator. That includes Tatler, Wallpaper, Mr. Kiyasu books.
Yeah.
Does the artist in you show up in how you approach regulation, especially when it comes to AI in central banking?
I wouldn't say that it shows up in AI governance or risk management or regulation.
Mm.
I would just share that. So I used to do digital art many, many years ago. What happened was I became a casualty of AI because when generative AI could do art that is better than mine, I
Right.
decided I better stop. But in a way,
Mm.
what happened was I reinvented myself. I decided to do physical art, watercolors, real physical watercolors. And actually, I felt that that made me grow a little bit more, right? And I think that's the same as AI risk management or AI governance. AI governance for a long time, I think personally, I may be wrong, but I think it was being done at too high a level. In ways that may be like what you say, sometimes theater more than actually practical implementations. But now that ChatGPT, Gen AI, agentic AI has come, I think we have reached a stage where we would like to reinvent ourselves. We need to go closer to the ground. We need to be clear about how to operationalize some of these things. And I think AI risk management is a term that I prefer over AI governance.
Wonderful. Well, on that note, that's all I have for today.
Yeah, thank
Gary,
you.
thanks for the time and being part of the show.
No problem. Yeah, I'm
This,
very happy
this,
to hear.
yeah, you're very welcome, Gary. This has been one of the most eye-opening episodes on the podcast, especially since we talked about a concept that is still relatively novel in central banking.
Yes,
Thanks
it is.
again, Gary.
Thank you. Thank you so much. See you.
Thank you.